is the ability to collect data. So let's break that quote down a little bit. Let's talk about what prospective research is. So prospective research follows individuals over time, and data is collected on them as their characteristics change. So the contrast of that would be retrospective research, which selects an individual and then information is collected on them from their past. Now, the reason why we like prospective research is that it has advantages such as minimization of bias and confounding variables. But the problem with prospective research is that it can often be time-consuming and inefficient for providers that are more so focused on patient care. That's where we, as EMRAs, find our niche of selecting, consenting, and enrolling eligible patients for research studies run by the emergency department. So as individuals looking to enter healthcare fields, which I'm sure many of you are, EMRA's highest priority is on patient care, and we do this by advancing the practice of emergency medicine through clinical research. And by helping advance the field of medicine through data collection, we aim to improve the lives of both the patients and the providers. Specifically, we do this through our mission, to assist with ED faculty conducting clinical research studies and provide volunteers educational opportunities for professional development. So as clinical research associates, we kind of have somewhat of a symbiotic relationship with our ED faculty in that while we help them collect data for their studies, we're also quite privileged with a lot of ED exposure and access to a lot of educational and developmental opportunities. So up next, we're going to have Trisha come and talk to you guys about our ED faculty sponsors.
Thanks, Miles. So my name is Trisha. I'm the manager for the EMRA program. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about our faculty sponsors. So our faculty essentially make the EMRA program really unique. We get to develop a really close relationship with them. And that's what really gives us the opportunity to be in the ED and get all these new exciting studies that our EMRAs can be a part of. So to kind of introduce you a little bit to our faculty sponsors, we first have Dr. Maurer, who actually founded EMRA way back when. Next is Dr. Hendy, who's actually the chair for the emergency department. Next is Dr. Cooper. She's a research director for the emergency department. And then we have Dr. Schreiger, who's the vice chair for the emergency department. So although these are just some of the faculty sponsors, we actually work with a lot of other faculty members as well as residents and fellows. But let's actually talk about you guys now. So who exactly are EMRAs? So can we get the next slide? Thanks. So EMRAs are a group of 30 to 40 volunteers who serve as basically the dedicated eyes and ears of the UCLA Emergency Department's Clinical Research Division. So we operate both in the ED as well as a separate office on the 8th floor of the hospital from 8 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week, essentially to screen, consent, and enroll patients in clinical studies. So out of my personal experience though, EMRA is a really valuable organization. I remember I joined it kind of early on in college, but it's a really great way for you guys to get an in-depth look at emergency medicine and clinical research, as well as like take part in all of our committees and be a part of a greater community. So now that I've talked to you a little bit about who we are, Rithik is actually going to explain to you guys what we aren't.
Thank you, Trisha. And like Trisha said, my name is Rithik. And so with these excellent opportunities for patient interaction, physician shadowing, and clinical research comes a lot of responsibility. Although we are afforded access to the Ronald Reagan Medical Center in the ED, it is important to note that we are not healthcare professionals, and as such, our activities cannot infringe on aspects of patient care. For example, we are not allowed to offer medical advice to patients. In addition, our role in the ED is gifted to us by research experts who we work collaboratively with to perform data collection activities and etc. However, due to the intensive nature of the research performed, members do not generally engage in data interpretation and analysis. With that said though, EMRA offers multiple opportunities for clinical exposure and research as our faculty sponsors and staff clinical research team understand and heavily support research associate involvement wherever applicable. Next slide, please. So now moving on to our duties. So our duties as EMRA associates are foundational for the execution of ongoing clinical research at Ronald Reagan. With clinical research primarily being completed in hospital and clinic environments, EMRAs engage in a unique form of research that allows them to not only gain knowledge on research proceedings, but also gain patient exposure. Roughly, most of our studies involve the following responsibilities: screening for patients, for qualifying patients, communicating with healthcare staff, assisting in obtaining informed consent from patients, and collecting data through a variety of metrics for some studies. Screening for patients, for example, allows EMRAs to utilize their in-depth knowledge of scientific research to look for qualifying patients and eventually approach physicians to move forward with patient consent. Although specific EMRA duties are dependent on the individual study being conducted, EMRAs are able to engage in high-level clinical research that can be found across the professional sphere, including the pharmaceutical industry and academia. As such, EMRAs are equipped with professional experiences that serve valuable for a variety of professional healthcare research careers, as they are able to interact with physicians and patients for study enrollments. If you have any further questions about what clinical research is and EMRA's role in ED clinical research at Ronald Reagan, feel free to contact us. And now Akil will discuss the EMRA experience.
All right, thank you, Rithik. Hi guys, I'm Akil. I'm also a coordinator here at EMRA. And I'm sure you guys are all wondering what EMRA has to offer you guys as potential members. So here are some components of what we call the EMRA experience under normal circumstances. While the unparalleled exposure to clinical research and the shadowing and observational opportunities in the ED is what appeals to most of our applicants, I believe it's important to emphasize EMRA's commitment to being a multifaceted organization that strives to help its members develop in a multitude of ways. As you can see, we offer a range of other resources, such as EM educational events, physician mentorship opportunities, a pre-med resources folder that's filled with great resources, professional development events such as resume and CV reviews, SRP 99 credit, and letters of recommendation from ED and faculty sponsors. But obviously, one of the most important parts of the EMRA experience is the amazing peers who share a passion for healthcare and research that you will form throughout your experience in this program. And lastly, we also get these snazzy emergency medicine jackets that you see EMRAs walking around with around campus if you guys are returning undergrads this year. Next slide. But obviously, due to COVID, we've had to adjust our program since volunteering in the ED directly is not feasible for the time being. Our fall EMRA experience involves replacing in-person volunteering with EMRA days and an emphasis on committee participation in the form of a 14-hour quarterly requirement of EMRA-related activities. This requirement can be achieved however each member chooses to do so. EMRA days are 2-hour-long events that are scheduled every 11 days this quarter that include guest speakers from various healthcare professions, member presentations on healthcare topics they're passionate about, and other enriching workshops and team-building activities. Lastly, our manager, Tricia, has been working really hard to put together a plan that would allow EMRAs to return to some sense of normalcy by allowing us to volunteer and screen remotely from the EMRA Bank of America suite. But this plan is still awaiting approval from the volunteer office. As you can see, we are still able to offer the majority of our other resources and workshops. We sadly cannot offer SRP 99 until further notice. Now, Rishabh will be talking about our completed studies.
Hey everyone, my name is Rishabh. We're going to be going through a few of the completed studies that EMRA's had, and then before we go into some of our current studies. So on the next slide, we can start diving into some of them. The first one here that you'll see is pediatric pulse oximetry variation between respiratory diseases. So this is PEDS-02 for short. This was a data collection study that EMRAs were able to get involved with, and it gave EMRAs a lot of access to talk to residents down in the ED. The primary goal of this study specifically was to identify what are considered normal and abnormal levels of O2 saturation in pediatric patients that are presenting to the ED. And the next study that we have here is outpatient venous thromboembolism management, also known as outpatient VTE. This study specifically investigated antithrombotics with patients with VTE, and we were trying to assess the viability of certain oral medications in the outpatient setting for those that are specifically at low risk. This study gave EMRAs a lot of access as well to talk to the residents and faculty down in the ED, but more than that, it also gave EMRAs a lot of access when they were charting. And we got a chance to look at a lot of specific charts for those that had VTE or potentially had VTE. And we got to look at specific diagnostic and clinical diagnostic measures that physicians were taking to assess specific patients that could have had VTE. The next study that we have on this list is transfusion of stored whole blood in a civilian trauma center, also known as our whole blood study. This is by far, if you talk to any EMRA that had the chance to work on this study, it is one of the favorites among EMRAs, primarily because it gave EMRAs a lot of access around the ED as well as the operating rooms. So this study specifically investigated different types of transfusion therapies in the acute trauma setting, and to see which one was the most efficacious of those. And as I said earlier, it gave a lot of opportunity for EMRAs to go into the ORs. And then we also, some students were allowed to use the thromboelastography machines to test blood samples. And then lastly, the last one we mentioned on this list of the many completed studies that we have is external validation of the San Francisco syncope rule. So this is a really old study that EMRA was involved with. I believe it's one of the first studies that EMRA got to see through. This study basically was validating a type of measure called the San Francisco syncope rule to assess the validity outside of the initial the research that was done on it. And basically EMRAs and the researchers found that the syncope rule was less sensitive and specific than it was initially reported, but it was still efficacious. As you can see, we have a little excerpt that we screenshotted there where EMRA was actually acknowledged in the publication for this study. But yeah, these are just some of the completed studies that we have. There are a lot more on this list, but these are just some of the ones that we wanted to highlight for you guys. And on top of that, you know, these studies really do highlight the amount of depth and breadth that EMRAs get exposed to in the ED. You know, it's not just one specific type of disease or incident. It really gives us a full wide exposure to different types of encounters that physicians may have with patients in the ED. But yes, up next we have Eric, and he's going to start, you know, diving into the current studies that we have.
Cool. Thank you, Rish. I'm Eric. I'm also a coordinator for EMRA. As for our current research, right now our shifts are currently paused due to the current pandemic, but EMRAs are still responsible for working on 4 different research studies. We're currently working to roll out a couple more studies regarding COVID-19, so that's something to look forward to as a potential new member. But as for now, EMRAs are responsible for working on CLOVERS, Abdominal CT, Myocardial Infarction, and EMPallA. What makes EMRA different from other research organizations is that members are responsible for knowing and working for all the clinical studies during their shifts. In this way, EMRAs learn a great deal about various types of physiological issues, diseases, and treatments rather than being confined to one specific study. As we go into more detail about our current studies in the next few slides, don't worry about memorizing them all. The purpose behind this info session and this information is to give you all a better idea of what we do and to see if you can imagine yourself doing exactly what we do. So first up is CLOVERS. CLOVERS stands for Crystalloid, Liberal or Vasopressors Early Resuscitation in Sepsis. It is a little bit of a mouthful, but as the name implies, the purpose behind this study is to determine which fluids treatment, more or less fluids, is more effective in treating septic patients. It is important because sepsis is a widespread excessive immune response that we are actually still researching and learning about. So the issue behind sepsis is that any kind of infection can lead to a cascade of chemicals released into the bloodstream. If not treated, this could potentially cause systemic inflammation, organ failure, and even death. And so the main question we're trying to answer with this study is how do we go about treating and preventing any lasting effects from this complex and important medical disorder? As for EMRAs, we're responsible for screening and enrolling eligible patients during our shifts. As this is a very time-sensitive study, this requires members to pay close attention to all the patients who could be potentially septic. EMRAs have to work quickly and be in constant communication with not only staff research associates who take care of the consenting, but also healthcare professionals like nurses and physicians. By working on this study, our members have the great opportunity to directly see a phase 3 clinical trial in a hospital environment and learn more about randomized interventions. So that's it for CLOVERS. Next is Akil, and he will be talking to you about abdominal CT.
Thanks, Eric. So abdominal CT, or its longer name, developing a decision instrument to guide selective abdominal/pelvic imaging of blunt trauma patients, is a study that we're using to determine whether low-risk criteria can reliably identify patients who have sustained significant abdominal or pelvic injuries and safely decrease CT imaging of blunt trauma patients. If you didn't catch that, it's basically the purpose of this study is to see if we can determine a screening tool or a survey that can help us better determine which patients that come into the ED for blunt traumas truly need a CT scan. This is done so to prevent a pretty expensive procedure in a CT and to decrease the radiation for patients that don't need it. The EMRA's role for the abdominal CT study includes responding to trauma pages and observing trauma resuscitations. And at the end of each resuscitation for a blunt trauma, we are responsible for approaching the chief resident to either fill out a survey that includes many potential factors for the decision to order or not order a CT scan for given blunt trauma patients. Once we get the survey filled out, we return to the EMRA office for additional data abstraction from the patient's charts. We record the survey responses in an online database called REDCap, and we audit previous entries by other EMRAs to catch any accidental mistakes. Now, Rithik will be talking about MI.
Thank you, Akil. The Myocardial Infarction, or MI study, investigates the potential correlations between Netrin-1 and DCC signaling and the nature of myocardial infarctions in patients. So Netrin-1 is a protein that is currently being investigated by the Chi Lab at UCLA as a biomarker that has a potential role in reducing ischemia reperfusion-induced infarct size. This study is unique because it provides EMRAs a novel perspective on the nature of clinical research at UCLA, as the trial involves the ongoing collaboration between the emergency department, EMRAs, and the Chi Lab. EMRA's roles in the study include monitoring STEMI patients, obtaining blood samples drawn by qualified hospital personnel, and transporting and handing off samples to the Chi Lab staff. The MI study allows EMRAs to play a critical role in one of the foremost examples of translational medicine and innovation at UCLA. And now Miles will go over our EMPallA study.
Right. Hi again, everybody. So our newest study is entitled EMPallA, which stands for Emergency Medicine Palliative Care Access. So what palliative care essentially aims to do is lessen the burden of illness for patients that have been diagnosed with serious or chronic illnesses. And this can be constituted through things like symptom management or pain management, as well as social well-being. So imagine you have a diagnosis of congestive heart failure or end-stage renal disease. These are diagnoses that are potentially going to follow you throughout the duration of your entire life. And as you can imagine, that can represent a pretty significant toll on someone's life views. So what palliative care aims to do is it aims to lessen that burden of having one of these chronic illnesses. And the EMPallA study specifically aims to compare two branches of palliative care. The first being nurse-led telephonic care, where a patient calls in to a nurse and then they receive their treatment that way, or physician-led outpatient care, where the patient goes to an outside site where they're going to be met with the physician, and that's how they receive their care. So essentially, we're collecting data to see which one of these two is better for patient-centered outcomes. And then next, we're going to have Valerie explain our upcoming studies.
Hi guys, my name is Valerie and I'm a coordinator here at EMRA. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the upcoming EMRA studies. So we have 3 studies rolling out in the near future, as you can see on the slide. So the first study is ASTER, which stands for acetaminophen and ascorbate in sepsis, targeted therapy to enhance recovery. And it will compare the 2 different treatment methods for patients suffering from symptoms of severe sepsis. Specifically, these are hypertension and respiratory failure. So the next study we have rolling out is a study looking at therapeutic hypothermia as a way to reduce or prevent brain damage in patients who are comatose because they suffered a cardiac arrest. And this study is best known as ISCAP, or the influence of cooling duration on efficacy in cardiac arrest patients in full. And finally, the final study that we have rolling out is called STREPIC, which is a study that is investigating a device that can identify pharyngitis in the throat by directly visualizing it. So as EMRAs, we're hoping and we're going to help out with identifying and enrolling patients for these studies at Ronald Reagan Emergency Department. And next, Garrett is going to start us off talking about various committees of EMRA.
Hi guys, I'm Garrett. So we often like to say that the EMRA experience is what you make of it. So what we mean by that is the more time you put into EMRA, the more value you're going to get out of the program and the more opportunities you're going to have that will carry on with you throughout the rest of your career. And committees are one excellent way to get more value out of EMRA. So we like to say that the core EMRA experience is what you work on shifts. It's your mandatory work. Committees are your optional work that can allow you to tailor the EMRA experience more to what you want out of it and allow you to invest more time into EMRA. So the first committee we'll talk about is research committee. So the goal with our research committee is to bridge the gap between the enrolling and consenting of patients in our studies to the published literature that comes out the other end. So clinical research has a lot of steps, and there's a lot of evidence that is produced and a lot of argumentation that is made, and a lot of it can seem very foreign to someone who doesn't understand it. So the goal of our research committee is to help you understand research better, understand the clinical research that you're doing in the hospital, and develop the communication skills and the evaluation skills necessary to evaluate clinical research and communicate it to others. So some of the projects we've been working on in our research committee, recently during the spring, we had poster day during undergraduate research week. EMRA had 4 different posters, and they all went excellently, and we're really proud of our members for working on those. And the members were able to see those posters through from start to finish and work on them all by themselves. So that was a really excellent opportunity that research committee was able to procure. Another awesome research opportunity for us is faculty projects with residents and attendings. So over time, random projects come up that our faculty mentors bring to us that may not necessarily fit the whole program, but maybe need 1 or 2 members to work on. And that's where the research committee can get involved and facilitate a connection between members who are in good standing in the program with different projects that they can work on more individualized basis and get to know a resident or attending better throughout the project. And then the core of the research committee experience is our journal clubs. So we meet tri-quarterly for journal clubs. They're roughly 2 hours. So that's the main time commitment for research committee. And you'll need to prepare for these outside of meetings by reading the papers that we're going to talk about. But during journal club, we'll have members present on the papers that they chose, and they'll be able to give an in-depth breakdown of a research paper of their choosing. Doesn't necessarily have to be related to EMRA, but it will be related to medicine. And it's a really great way to learn how to read research, learn how to communicate research, and learn how to understand clinical research. So that's the goal of our research committee, and we're really excited to continue moving forward in COVID. We're trying to ramp up the number of opportunities we have available to members. And up next is Miles with the training committee.
Right. So as you guys might imagine, transitioning to EMRA might be kind of a daunting task. I know that when I first got accepted into the program, I was incredibly intimidated, not only by the amount of information that was being thrown at me, but the breadth and the scope of the information, as well as the limited amount of time we had to learn it. So really what the new member training committee aims to do is kind of alleviate those stresses and take the necessary steps to transition you guys, the applicants, into independent EMRAs. So the great thing about the training committee is we use experienced EMRA members as our trainers. So anyone in the committee will generally be training a new member. So as a new member, what you guys need to know is that the first couple shifts you go on, it's essentially going to be you shadowing the more experienced member. And then as time goes on, we'll slowly give you guys more responsibilities until you are an autonomous independent EMRA. And then, so if you do like training or you're interested in teaching, I highly recommend you become a trainer because in my opinion, it's relatively low commitment. So the bulk of your training is going to be done during your normal shifts. So there's not much time lost there. The only thing we do ask of trainers is that you attend a 2-hour quarterly meeting called Training the Trainers meeting, where we essentially standardize the training protocol so that every new member gets a solid education. And then next we're going to have Henna and Valerie talk about the Mentorship Committee.
Hi everyone, I'm Henna. So at its core, EMRA is truly an educational program, and Mentorship Committee helps develop the different projects and facilitate different opportunities to really give members that outside educational experience beyond what you guys can gain in shifts. So committee members oversee a variety of different projects, including the shadowing experience, different EM event attendance, so these include EM conferences and faculty lectures, different pre-professional workshops, and we try to tailor these to the time period. So if there are a lot of members taking the MCAT, we try to have MCAT workshops. If it's close to the application period, we try to have AMCAS workshops and different other educational opportunities. And physician/member mentorship opportunities in order to provide members with insight into different pre-health career pathways, application process overviews, academic guidance, and different professional development opportunities. And truly the goal of this committee is to help bridge that gap between pre-med students and different practicing healthcare professionals in order to help members achieve their career goals, whether that's going to medical school, whether that's pursuing a PhD to conduct research, or pursuing any other healthcare profession. We try to give members the resources, the mentorship, and the insights to help reach their career dreams. So in terms of commitment, we have 2 bi-quarterly meetings. We usually combine these, so a post-quarter meeting and a pre-quarter meeting combine into one big meeting. So we'll discuss the different projects we had in the previous quarter and then any upcoming projects. And then any work conducted on outside of meetings is in addition to these mandatory meetings. So truly, as Garrett said, for Mentorship Committee, what you put in is what you get out. So the more projects you're a part of, the more skills you can develop. And truly, as you go through the committee and you start doing projects, there's more and more leadership opportunities. So if that's something you're interested in, we try to tailor your experience in the committee. So not only can we provide valuable resources for the EMRA members, but you also get to develop your own kinds of goals in the committee, whether that's learning to communicate with alumni, helping lead a project, bringing your vision into fruition for a new project. We truly try to help make sure that you as committee members also have a valuable experience while putting out high quality projects. And now Valerie is going to talk to you guys a little bit more about specific projects we've had in the past, as well as ongoing projects.
Hi again, guys. So as Hannah said, the Mentorship Committee has a really wide array of resources that are aimed at really improving the experience of EMRAs in and out of the organization. So as you can see on the slide, some of our main resources include mentorship pairings, which allow EMRAs to learn from their peers and alumni, as well as better connect with other EMRAs. I was personally part of this program and still am part of this program as a coordinator, and it's really helped me on my pre-medical journey, really helped me figure out my MCAT plans, and just helped me navigate the UCLA experience. Another resource that we have are the professional development workshops, which are aimed at helping EMRAs with being an undergrad at UCLA in general, as well as easing their pre-med journey. And a related resource is the pre-med resource folder and the applying member resources, which are directly aimed at helping pre-meds and helping guide EMRAs along their pre-med journey. A lot of these resources are unique to EMRA and are compiled from previous EMRA members, making them really, really useful for future applicants. And some of our other resources that the Mentorship Committee provides and opportunities that it sets up include various guest speakers, such as residents from the emergency department, as well as nurses, PAs, and many, many other medical professionals, and as well as emergency medicine educational events, which grant us access to completely unique events usually only available for emergency medicine residents. For example, emergency medicine conferences are educational events for emergency medicine residents, but EMRAs are very, very fortunate to be allowed access to some of them, and we get a glimpse into the life and education of UCLA medical school residents, as well as have the opportunity to learn about various very interesting medical cases and new developing medical techniques. Most recently, a lot of these emergency medicine conferences have been focused on various aspects of COVID in the emergency room, and it's been fascinating to see how the emergency department at Ronald Reagan is being impacted by COVID and how the residents are being taught to deal with it. So next, we're going to have Radha talk about what we look for in applicants.
Hi everyone, I'm Radha and I'm here to talk to you about the kind of members that we're looking for. So first and foremost, we seek individuals who are passionate about medicine and healthcare, but ultimately about the research that we do in the hospital. We also look for individuals who show this passion through their dedication to responsibilities that they may have and by being dependable. And along those lines, communicating efficiently and conducting oneself professionally are essential to not only being a stellar member of this organization, but also for future careers. We also look for individuals who take on different opportunities to make the most of their experiences, who show attention to detail in their various tasks, and ultimately those who make good judgment calls, whether they are inside or outside of the hospital. So next we have Rishabh, who's going to talk about time commitment.
All right. Hello again, everybody. So today, or right now, we're going to be talking about time commitment really quickly. This is a big question for a lot of new members that are interested in the program. So first off, to get started off with, when you join the program, you're going to be bound to a 1-year time commitment. And this is going to be at the completion of your training. So training usually happens. So if we have a fall cycle, training will be completed by the end of fall, so that by the time winter starts, that's when your 1-year time commitment will begin. So make sure to keep that in mind. And this includes holidays and school breaks. So winter break, summer break, that commitment still holds. Traditionally, during normal times, we will have 8 hours per week for each individual that's in EMRA. This includes 4 hours in our regular shift. So regular shift entails screening, enrolling, and consenting patients to studies. Then we have a 2-hour clerical shift. The clerical shift is more of auditing work and doing follow-up phone calls for some of our studies, because we need to follow up with patients a few days after that they visited the ED. And then lastly, just because there's so many new studies that are coming in and out of EMRA, we expect EMRAs to spend 2 hours a week just kind of catching up on studies, reading through the emails that the coordinator team is sending out, and just staying active. Lastly, another thing that I wanted to mention is that there's 2 general meetings per quarter, and those tend to be 2 to 3 hours in length. This is when it's normal and not under COVID circumstances. I'll get to that in a second, but just so that you have an idea of what the expectations are when things are normal, it's 2 to 3 hours in length during a normal quarter. And then, as we said earlier, your experience is exactly what you make of it, right? So this is the baseline 8 hours per week for your time commitment. But the more involved that you get, the more committees that you decide to pursue, the more projects that you end up getting involved with, that time tends to grow. But most people, if you ask anyone, those extra hours that you're putting in are really, you just enjoying yourself in the program, and it's more for academic development and professional development. So, these are things that you end up having resources at your fingertips and you just want to pursue. And then lastly, there's summer shifts as well. That's something that, is really important for EMRA, because we run, year round, because the ED never sleeps, so to speak. So during summer, one of the things that's really important is that for new members, we do expect everyone to be here throughout the entire summer. But there are opportunities for you to block your time over summer so that you're only here for half of summertime. So basically what that would look like is, instead of doing 1 shift every week throughout the entirety of summer, you can do 2 shifts a week for half of summer, and then the other half you have off. And just to emphasize, there are no deferrals of admission for EMRA. If you do get into this cycle, you are expected to start the next training cycle, but then you're not allowed to let us know that, hey, I won't be able to make it for this next cycle. Can I defer admission for the next time? All right, so now that we've kind of gone over what things look like when it's normal, we'll talk about what it looks like when COVID's going on. And we've made a few adjustments, and Akil has talked about this briefly. This 1-year time commitment is shifted. I mean, there's no more training, so to speak, and unless Trisha is able to find a way for us to get started doing remote screening. But in the meantime, we're going to say that at the start of winter quarter is when the 1-year time commitment is going to begin, because you'll have some time during fall quarter just to get to know everybody and understand how the program works. We've also adjusted the time commitment. Instead of the 80 hours per quarter that would have been there, now it's around 14 hours per quarter. We know a lot of you might be going through tough times right now, so we're trying to make it as accessible and easy for our members to stay engaged with the program and get something out of it, but we're not really holding as high of a bar as normal. This 14 hours also entails mandatory attendance at 3 of the EMRA days that we spoke of. And just to kind of dive into EMRA days a little bit more, EMRA days are basically just a few days throughout the quarter that we've picked out, which are in 2-hour blocks. And those 2-hour blocks include guest speakers, workshops, and whatnot. This particular quarter, we have the opportunity to have a lot of our residents and faculty to come speak to us during the EMRA day. So for example, we have Dr. Anna Yap, she's a resident. She's going to be talking about advocacy and diversity in medicine next week, I believe. Our faculty member, Dr. William Maurer, will be coming in to talk about blunt trauma, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different people that are coming to talk to us that are professionals in their field. as well as workshops that we are creating as a coordinator team, as EMRAs, to support one another. And as I said, getting into those other activities and projects kind of add up with those additional hours into that 14-hour total. And as I mentioned on the last slide, we will still have general meetings during COVID time, but those will now be 1 hour in length, and they will be on an EMRA day. And once again, as you know, just like when things are normal here now in COVID, we're trying to continually put out as many resources as possible for members to stay engaged with. So the experience that you're going to have in EMRA during COVID is really going to be dependent on what you make of it. So the more involved that you get, the more you'll get out of the program. And up next, we have Henna, I believe, to talk about how you can get involved with the program. Or actually, no, this is my slide, sorry. So to get more involved with the program, there are about 10 students that are typically accepted from cycle to cycle. And accepted members will start with a probationary period. That's going to be during fall quarter for you all. And then applicants that have applied before are highly, highly encouraged to reapply. We honestly know that people have, especially during this time, have learned a lot, have reflected a lot, and we really want to hear how things have changed for you since the last time that you've applied. So if you are a reapplicant, we really, really encourage you to send another application, and we will look at it carefully. And now up next, we have Henna to talk to you about volunteer office requirements.
Hi, everyone. So before we get into the specific requirements, I just want to emphasize that all of these different requirements are set in place by the volunteer office. So we, as the EMRA program, have no say in establishing those requirements or any adjustments. It's entirely up to the volunteer office for you to be an active volunteer in good standing. So diving right into it, one of the most important ones for you guys to plan ahead for is immunizations, the first of which is to get a TB test or vaccination within the past year. So I know it might be difficult right now to see your primary care provider, so it is important to plan ahead and make some time to try and get this test done. If you are near the UCLA campus, ASH is still doing these tests. The nice thing is you don't need to make an appointment. You just submit something through the portal, and then you can go in anytime during lab hours. So do try to plan ahead, as it can take some time depending where you're at to get this test done, but it is a requirement set forth by the volunteer office. If you are an existing volunteer through the volunteer office, we will require a reference from the coordinator of your current volunteer program. And this is to ensure that you're in good standing with that program and are able to do both the EMRA program and that program concurrently. If you are a volunteer in a different program and you're considering applying for the EMRA program, do consider the time commitments both with COVID adjustments and if things were normal, if you would be able to do both programs concurrently. Ultimately, the goal with our program and different programs is to transition back to normalcy with the go-ahead of the volunteer office. So do consider both options to make sure that either way you're able to give your all to both programs. And kind of along those lines, if you are in a different program, you must make sure to complete the minimum commitment for that program first. So there is no program hopping. For example, if you're in care extenders, I think the requirement is 50 hours. So you must complete those 50 hours first before joining the EMRA program. And again, that's set forth by the volunteer office, so we can't really make any adjustments on that end. And finally, we have an age requirement. So you must be at least 18 years old by the time you join the program. So if you're turning 18, let's say next week, then that's perfectly okay. You're able to apply. But if you don't turn 18 until, let's say, February, then we encourage you to apply in the spring because you won't be able to join the program in the fall. And if you're curious more about what our timeline looks like, Garrett is actually going to take you through that right now.
Go to the next slide. Awesome. So I'm going to talk about the application process right now. So the application link is right there on the screen. You can also Google UCLA EMRA. It's the first website that'll pop up, and then just pick the recruitment tab at the top of the screen. So the application will open after our second Q&A info session, which is on Friday, October 16th, and the application will open at midnight that night. So moving forward, rather, if you hit it again, thanks. The application will be due the following Friday, so you'll have a week to work on it. And the deadline is 11:59 p.m., and the application will automatically close at that time. there's nothing we can do about it after it closes. So please don't start the application late. It's an essay-based application, so you're definitely going to want to get started on it early and work on it throughout the week. Feel free to submit it whenever you want, as long as you submit it before the deadline. And we unfortunately can't accommodate any technical difficulties, so try and submit the application as early as you can to avoid those technical difficulty issues. Once your application gets submitted, they'll be de-identified and reviewed by a panel of coordinators and managers. We're going to try and get as many eyes on your application as possible. We try and be holistic with your application, and we want to avoid having any personal bias, so we're going to de-identify your application while we're reading it. And it's going to be scored against a standardized rubric, so we can try and ensure consistency across the panels and also across all the applicants. And GPAs are considered in the screening process. However, it's not the determining factor about whether or not you're going to get into the program or not. So let me read you some stats about GPAs. So our average GPA for freshmen is a 3.9, and our average GPA for second through fourth years is a 3.7. So there's a section on the application where you can discuss whatever you want at the end of all the essays. If you feel like your GPA is below this range and you feel like you want to discuss it, please feel free to write about it in your application under that question. Again, you don't have to. And just because your GPA is below that range does not mean that we won't consider you for admission. All applications below that range will still be read. We have members that have been well below that range that have still gotten into the program. But we're going to pay closer attention to your transcripts and your academic ability within your essays relative to other applicants if your GPA is low. EMRA is a very rigorous program, and it requires a lot of your time. And we don't want EMRA to be a reason why your academics suffer. So that is why we do factor in GPA into your application. So if you go to the next slide, please. So after your applications are read and scored, we'll send out interviews invites over Zoom. So the primary interview invites will go out October 31st, and the first round will happen that week. So you'll be able to sign up for a time that works for you. And during this interview process, we'll ask that you provide the following things: an unofficial transcript, a headshot of yourself. So you don't have to take a professional headshot that costs hundreds of dollars. Just try and get a nice headshot on a good background so we can see your face, a resume, and at least one reference contact who we can contact to get more information about you. And then after primary interviews, if you do well, selected applicants will be invited back for secondaries by November 8th, and the second round will happen that week. It's the same thing as primaries. You'll sign up for a time that works for you. And then we hold deliberations after the interviews, and we try and be as holistic as possible with your application. We're going to place emphasis on meaningful experiences, your communication skills, because communication is extremely important as a member of EMRA, and on your potential to grow and develop in the program, and also what you can contribute. We look for unique members that are going to grow a lot in our program, be able to provide a lot back to us, and we hope that it's a mutually beneficial relationship between both our members and the program itself. And again, you don't need prior research or medical experiences. Plenty of members have gotten in without them. That is not going to be a deciding factor, but if you do have them, please be sure to mention that. And next up will be Rithik talking about diversity.
So in EMRA, diversity is vital to all of our proceedings. In addition to enhancing our recruitment processes, we are collaborating with organizations at UCLA to create and execute actionable goals that ensure that our program is a safe space for all of our members. If you have any questions about how we as a program are committed to diversity and inclusion, please feel free to reach out to any member of the coordinator team. And I'm going to pass it on to Garrett again.
So please take out your phone, scan that QR code. It's going to link you to our website. You can also just Google it. There's a social media tab on our website, and please make sure to follow us there. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to take out your phone and scan that. All right, and then questions for our live Q&A sessions can be submitted at the following link. You can also email them to us at the email on the bottom of the screen. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Hopefully we'll answer all of them if there's not too many. So please make sure any questions you have get submitted to that link before the session starts. And thank you for coming.